In this episode of the Stamina Lab podcast, I spoke to Jonny Miller. Jonny is the host of the Curious Humans podcast, a nervous system researcher and instructor for the Nervous System Mastery course, which I participated in earlier this year and have been using so many of the techniques with myself and with our clients ever since. In this episode, we discuss how your nervous system gets hijacked in response to stress. And we talk about practical tools you can use to take back control, to be more present, improve your sleep, and perform better in every aspect of your life. Jonny even takes us through an exercise at the end of the episode that will leave you refreshed and ready to drop into creative flow. I know you'll get a lot out of this conversation, so let's get started. All right. Hi, Jonny. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Hey, Glenn. It's great to be here.
So you have described the human nervous system as one of the most complex operating systems in the known universe. Could you say a little bit more about what you mean by that and why this nervous system is so important to us?
Yes, of course. Well, I think it's probably helpful to start by saying that we're still learning about the nervous system, and there's so much that we don't know. That there are like 100 million different neuroconnections, and something about these sense organs that we have, whether it's our eyes, our ears, our taste, something about the way the light hitting our sense perceptions, that then converts into subjective experience through the lens of our nervous system. And something that I think is very interesting for people to explore is how the state that our nervous system can be in directly, it's like a lens, it's like a filter for our experience. So if we're in a state where we're angry or where we're anxious, it changes what we pay attention to, and it changes our lived experience of life. And so it's kind of like the David Foster Wallace piece around the two fish, and one fish says, "How's the water?" and the other fish is like, "What water?" Well, the nervous system is kind of like the water that we're swimming in. And so by exploring it and getting curious about it, I think it's a very, for me, it's been a very kind of potent way to increase my intentionality in life and to live from a less reactive place.
The course you have, the Nervous System Mastery course, which I took in the spring, this course explores all this, and this is really interesting deep dive into how to start with that perception, being more aware of the nervous system and how these different states affect you in the different parts of your lives. And I have to say now, but it's been 4 or 5 months since then, is just feeling really what's interesting that continues to resonate over and over and over again. And one of those pieces is when being able to be more aware when your brain is being hijacked, to be able to start doing some protocols around that. And you talked about in the course and about the hijacking coming and being able to handle it via a top-down method versus a bottom-up method. And I thought that would be really interesting to share.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad it was helpful as well. That's always good to hear.
So many different ways.
Top down versus bottom. No, that's great. Well, the top down versus bottom up was a real, like a kind of aha moment for me, because I'd spent many years as a startup founder almost collecting what I now realize in hindsight were these kind of top-down models. And what top-down basically means is using the brain, using the mind to change the state of your body. So an example might be, people will say use cognitive reframes when something stressful happens. And that could be, you won't care about this likely in 2 years' time or even 2 months' time, or the fact that you're stressed means that you really care about this thing. So that helps to give you a sense of purpose behind the stress. And these things are definitely helpful. Like I'm not knocking them in any way, shape or form. But when it comes to shifting the mode that your nervous system is in, it's actually more effective to use a bottom-up protocol. And what bottom-up means basically is like body to brain. And there's actually some estimates that there are 4 times more neurons going from the body to the brain, was known as efferent as opposed to afferent neurons. And so by making changes to your body, primarily through, say, shifting your breathing, shifting your posture, even shifting your gaze, your visual aperture, that has a disproportionate impact on your nervous system state. And then that will, in turn, the knock-on effect of that is it will often change the thoughts and feelings that you have, because your nervous system, let's say it goes from heightened sympathetic and overwhelm into calm relaxation. The problem that you thought you had, that you were maybe trying to reframe, suddenly doesn't become so much of an issue anymore, and you know, more possibilities tend to appear when you're in a more expansive place. So that's a big, I think it's a big part of what gets people in through the door for the kind of work that I do, because you can, you can do a simple breathing practice, and then a few minutes later you're like, wow, I feel so much better. And it's so much easier than going in mental loops for, minutes, sometimes even hours. And it just means you can kind of bypass the mind.
Yeah, that 4 times more effective, or 4 times more information is going from the nervous system to the brain. Is that correct? Instead of from the brain down. Yeah, and so that's really powerful effect. And what I've noticed in my experience is that it's working, and then in addition to the top down protocols, so you can use that moment of breathing to then just get better control, to then allow for the reframing or the change in the mindfulness practices that you couldn't get to work, or get stuck in.
Oh,
But they work hand in hand.
absolutely. And then there's kind of the third category that is, I kind of call it like outside in, where you maybe change your environment as well. So maybe you do all 3 things at the same time. You could, I don't know, I might go co-regulate with my puppy and just like cuddle my puppy in a relaxing bedroom, and then do breathing practices, and then journal. And it's like, you don't have to, if you do all 3, you're kind of increasing the efficiency of all of them, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and co-regulation is something that I've been exploring a lot with people, and it's really, when I
Oh, cool.
talk about with people, they really feel, oh, this makes a whole lot of sense. Especially the part where you go hug your dog, I mean, they're almost designed to be for co-regulation with you, and how powerful that
Yeah.
how, how powerful that can be to help calm yourself, or calm somebody else. And that's really, I think, one of the most powerful parts of it, is being able to help calm somebody else with just a hug and some breathing slowly on your part, and they don't have to do anything, and they don't have to be aware that you're doing anything, but the outcome is the outcome.
Yeah, I love that. Are there any ways that you've been experimenting with it or exploring it? Like, what are some things that you've tried?
Yeah, well, definitely when some of my loved one is, you can tell that they're just not in a good spot, and yeah, you could give a hug before, but now it's, the hug is has a little more power behind it, because there's also a breathing that's happening on my side that I'm doing to to use my calm nervous system to help calm their nervous
Yeah.
system, and it feels like a superpower, quite honestly. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
had that experience.
Yeah, there's something that's just come to mind of, I never really thought of it this way before, but you know how there's a typical kind of male stereotype of the men trying to fix the problem that the female partner has. And I feel like that's like one partner trying to use a top-down solution to fix something that actually isn't helpful, when all that is required is like you say, just kind of dropping down your own state, and then being in someone's presence and just like witnessing whatever is arising is more often than not, I think, what is being asked for, even if it's implicitly and not explicitly being asked for.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that just listening and being is really what you're asking, being asked for in
Yeah,
that
totally.
stereotype. The
Exactly.
the three operating system modes, you've alluded to it a little bit, but I think that's really important to understand that the three operating modes are and how they're essential to noticing when you're getting hijacked, and what and how to get back to calm, or if you are in a state that is almost depressive, and how to get yourself out of it. Just being aware of these states. I don't know if you could describe them a little bit, because you have a great illustration of how to describe them in the course.
Yeah. So, well, firstly, I'll say this is drawing from the research by Dr. Stephen Porge on polyvagal theory, and Deb Dana as well. He's done a lot of great work in this area. And basically, what his I guess his insight was, the nervous system has three branches, not two. Most people know the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, which is like sympathetic is go, 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 alertness, parasympathetic is rest and digest. But what he realized is the parasympathetic has two branches. These are the vagal branch, or ventral vagal, and dorsal. And these two branches have very specific uses, both in a kind of like a healthy use case, and then the dorsal has a kind of an unhealthy mode as well. So the sympathetic, as most people know, it's kind of mobilizing energy, which if it goes outside of our capacity or outside of our window of tolerance, then that can go into overwhelm or anxiety or frustration, things like that. Um, the ventral vagal is basically it's the branch that's associated with the co-regulation. It's like, this is social safety, it's play, it's you're able to make kind of eye contact with people. It's basically a sense of embodied safety. And then the dorsal is deep rest. So when we're asleep, when we're feeling incredibly relaxed, but it's also used as kind of a fuse switch or a handbrake. So when we spend if we spend too long in that sympathetic mode, maybe we're really stressed about something for several days or even weeks, and we go too far outside of our window of tolerance, it will trip like a fuse switch and cause us to kind of collapse. And that can look like depression, it can look like lethargy, it can look like burnout, exhaustion. And so just being aware that the nervous system has these different modes, and they're all there for a reason. Like, they're all kind of very well adapted survival strategies in a certain way. And there are ways to skillfully move away from them and back into that kind of ventral safety, which is where we want to be most of the time. And you can be in sympathetic and ventral at the same time. That's like, if we're playing a game, we might get fired up, we might get very competitive, but we're still in our bodies, we still feel safe. And you can also be in ventral and dorsal when you're deeply relaxed. You're like, there's often like a lot of wonder that can come in that place as well. So yeah, I find it very helpful to both know that and also be aware of how these different modes actually feel in our bodies. And there's an exercise that we have in the course where you kind of map these different states to how you experience them in your own nervous system. Like, for some people, sympathetic, maybe their breath will get shallow, their heart rate will increase, they might get flushed, their gaze gets narrow. Dorsal, maybe they contract, they hunch, it's hard to make eye contact. Maybe there's no energy. There's lots of different ways, and it does show up differently for different people. And so I found it a very helpful map, and also in communication as well. Like, sometimes my wife and I I'll say like, oh hey, I'm noticing I'm starting to go into shutdown. Like, just give me a moment to kind of come back, and we'll continue this in a moment or two. So it's very helpful.
Yeah, and you talked about the you can be in two different states, and and these are different states. There's what's we're really trying to is our managing our states, and because sometimes we want to be in we want to be in the sympathetic state, we want to get move in that direction. But it's this window of tolerance that you mentioned. I think is something that is to be explored, because we want to have you want to have a you want to be able to kind of grow your window of tolerance, I think, in certain areas. And I think I would think that there was a window of tolerance is different for different situations. And so what do you recommend for practices to be able to improve or grow your window of tolerance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, different people, as you say, have very different capacities in different contexts as well. So generally speaking, it's analogous to like muscle growth. So if you go to the gym and you want to get stronger, you want to get fitter, you want to train so that you're on your edge, but you're not overtraining so that you get injured, or so that you just can't recover at all. So generally what that looks like is putting yourself into situations where you have some degree of control over how intense it is, and you're also able to step away. So for example, something like cold plunging, like using an ice bath in the morning, is a great way to build your both your capacity to hold that sympathetic intensity when you first get in. There's that kind of like deep breath that you take, and then how efficiently you can downshift into relaxation once you're still in the cold. Heat is the same. So hot and cold, and they also have a ton of health benefits, which is a nice bonus as well. So I think playing with sauna and cold plunge is a great starting point. Let's see what other practices. I mean, honestly, having conversations that you're typically afraid of is a great one. And the caveat being that there is kind of mutual trust and support with the person that you're speaking with. There's practices like circling is getting very popular at the moment, which is it's almost like an arena for this kind of relational sparring in some ways. That can be a great way.
Can you say more about circling? I'm not really familiar with that.
So circling, it's also framed as like a social meditation where you are revealing your internal experience to someone else. So you might say, as I'm listening to you speak, I'm noticing a tightness in my chest and a story that ... So you're just kind of sharing what is happening in real time with your inner experience, and the other person does the same, reflects back, and you kind of go back and forth. So that's another good way. And then the final way that again has a bunch of health benefits is improving your CO2 tolerance, and this is primarily trained through breath holds, particularly breath holds at the bottom of exhale. So you can do something called the BOLT test, where you take a normal breath, you exhale normally, and then at the bottom of your exhale, you see how many seconds you can hold your breath out for. And if it's more than 25 to 30, that's pretty good. If it's less, then this is probably an area to work on. And your CO2 tolerance is directly related to, how quickly people go into anxiety or panic attacks. And people like freedivers, for example, have very high CO2 tolerance, and it translates to them being very calm and having high capacity on land as well when they're not diving 200 feet underwater.
Yeah, and the cold plunges, we did that as one of the extras, homework assignments. We went and had to do that during the course, which was fun to go do. And and not having access to a cold plunge all the time, you don't necessarily need that. You can do it with a cold shower. You can start to get some of that benefits. I think anybody could do that in their own home, and in the morning particularly, not so much in the evening, since you are ramping up your sympathetic system there for a bit. And the question I was, there's the debate over whether there's health benefits to that. I'm like, well, regardless, you are increasing your window of tolerance in your nervous system, and I think that's without a doubt. And I think
right.
and you notice it's uh, is undeniable when you're in an uncomfortable situation, or when you're in cold period. Like, oh wait, I've been in this situation before. I've done it to myself. I can calm myself down, and then that starts to become applicable in other areas outside just the cold plunge.
Yeah, exactly. And you can practice some of these bottom up protocols. Like I still do the humming when I'm in the cold, and it just helps. It's almost by default now, and it really helps me to. It's partly a ritual at this point, but it really helps me to downshift as well. And then I remember to do that more in other situations where I'm in proverbial freezing water.
Yeah, yeah. And then getting these states which are right on the edge of your window of tolerance, where you're right there at the edge. These are also the same strategies that we coach for when you're trying to help people get into a flow state too, as well. Just being right on that edge of skill set, so that you're at the master of it, but not too far over it, or and not too far down where you're getting bored and you lose interest. So I thought it's interesting that we're working on like a creative state or a flow state or even sleep, which I want to talk about, but it's managing some of these edges.
Yeah, and I also think that flow is a good example where it's a blend of the sympathetic with the ventral. So there is this sense of safety and relaxation and almost ease, but there's also a lot of energy and a lot of activation energy at the same time, which creates what we often view as like masterful performances, where it looks like someone is just effortlessly flowing through something, and there is a lot of energy, but they're not. They're very much in their body at the same time.
Yeah, and that goes also back to I want to talk about the state over story, and I want to talk a little bit about it from an athletic standpoint, and because I use this as an example a lot when I'm talking and coaching to people, is that the point where you're getting into that state where you're I'm anxious, and you say, well, anxiety is very close to being in a focused, energetic state. Those two are really close, and so correct, right? That's that moment where you can reframe your story
Yep.
from anxiety to that state. And when I say, okay, well, if I'm preparing for a race, when I'm a runner and I'm racing, and the day of the race, I start to feel that excitement and anxious. One, I've been training for it, so I've done all the things, so I'm prepared. There's a safety there that I can go back to, and I can, instead of shutting down from pulling out the window of tolerance, that taking some breaths and saying, no, we're ready for this. I mean, that gets you into that flow state. That challenge mode is just really balancing that out, and that's using. I think that in that case, it's really using both those bottom up and top down protocols to help you get into flow state. I mean, it's not the flow states are fun to try to play with in different contexts, but yeah, the understanding of the nervous system has a lot of help to being able to get into flow, where we can have all these benefits of performance.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm increasingly interested in exploring this work for creativity and for for kind of creative performance in that way, because I do think that exceptional, whether it's like writing or music, it's getting yourself into a certain state, like a certain nervous system tone in these three branches, and then kind of getting out of the way and just like allowing the thing to flow through you, whether that's music, whether it's writing, whether it's chess. So there's a lot here, and I'm actually gonna reread Jamie Wheal and Stephen Kotler's book Stealing Fire, because I feel
Stealing
like
Fire,
there's more to. There's a lot of a lot of parallels here that I'd like to explore more for myself.
The state over story part that I want to come back to, because that's a bit of what I was trying to allude there. What do you mean when you say embrace state over story?
Yeah, so state of a story, it's a shorthand way of kind of speaking to that top down versus bottom up protocol difference. So it's whilst the top down protocols can be effective, I always prefer to start with the bottom up. So starting by shifting your state, and then you can work with reframing the story in whatever way is most helpful. So the with the example that you just gave around feeling anxiety, like starting with, maybe it's a simple breathing practice, maybe it's box breathing, maybe it's alternate nostril breathing or humming. After you've done a few rounds of that, then you can kind of remind yourself of, oh yeah, I'm anxious because I care about this race and I've trained so much and I really want to win. And my sense is that, at least in my experience, it's more effective for that story to come in after you've done something to change your state. And the state changing thing could be very simple, could be very quick, could just be changing your posture, changing your awareness, like expanding your awareness to the area behind you, the area to the sides of you. There's very like kind of in the moment things you can do. But yeah, I just find that to be more effective.
And the ability to, I'm like, well, I do a lot of work with sleep, as you know, and I have been incorporating so many of these different techniques that we've been talking about into helping people
Cool.
get to sleep in the wind down process. A lot of it in the wind down process, where where the mind is racing and the nervous system is still ramped up. Obviously we're trying to put our devices away to start the calming thing, but then that only does so much. The blue light glasses, those help with the light coming in, which is activating that. But the breathing in the nervous system is really, I think, a game changer for trying to help people get to sleep. How do you use these nervous system techniques to help improve your sleep, or recommend for other people to help with their sleep?
Yeah, sure. So my wife, who actually just walked in the door, used to be a sleep coach, and so this is an area which I guess I've benefited from her research and expertise as well. But again, you can kind of think about it through those three different lenses: the top down, the bottom up, and the outside in. So I think the first place to start is creating an environment that is conducive to sleep. So there are the obvious things around blackout blinds, around reducing noise, having a consistent sleep wake time, having that wind down period where there's no screens that are present, having dim lights, wearing blue blocking glasses, eating your last meal, a couple of hours or more before sleep. Maybe checking the temperature, having like a cool sleeping environment, stretching. There are all of these things that can like create the environment that is more conducive for sleep to arise naturally. And then on top of that, there's also the bottom up practices, of which there are many, but basically any of them which activate the parasympathetic system. So for me, this typically looks like long hold stretching, particularly with forward folds. And when you stretch out the spine, that also activates some of the parasympathetic nerves that are there. It has this relaxing, calming effect. Doing a alternate nostril breathing practice where the exhale is twice as long as the inhale, like a 4-4-8 or 5-5-10 breathing practice. Things like relaxing music can make a big difference. Let's see what else comes to mind. And then if you're someone who's kind of in your head a lot, or you have a lot of thoughts racing, then the top down piece around maybe journaling, maybe just free writing journaling, letting all of the thoughts out on the page, and then going back and just like, yeah, just letting them out in that way. So it's I think of it as having many different experiments to run, and with sleep in particular, it's really it's not how do you sleep, it's how do you create the conditions for sleep to just naturally emerge, for that sense of sleepiness to just like a yawn, like like I normally know when I'm ready, when there's like a big yawn or a big sigh. I'm like, oh yeah, like sleep's gonna come. It's gonna be a good night's sleep now. So it's like creating the conditions for that,
state.
like
Go ahead,
downshift.
What did you say?
Yeah,
Downshift?
it's an emergent state, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it, just like getting a flows emergent state, we're trying to create the conditions for it. But you have mentioned multiple times about humming. Why is humming so powerful for managing your nervous system?
Yeah, there is some research around this. It's not as comprehensive as I might like. Um, from what I've read and from what I understand, there's a few different things going on. Maybe three mechanisms. Let's see if I can get all three. So the first one is there is an extended exhale. So the exhale is at least twice as long as the inhale, sometimes three or four. Like if you hum all the way to the end of your breath, it might be 3 or 4 times longer than your inhale. So that in itself activates the parasympathetic nervous system. The second is the vibration of the humming tones the vagus nerve, which is associated with this ventral vagal kind of calming part of the nervous system. That's a second one, so it increases the vagal tone. And then the third is, and this is actually amplified if you hum and you put your fingers over your eyes and your thumbs in your ear. There is a kind of vibration in your sinus cavities and your nasal passages, which releases nitric oxide. And the nitric oxide is a vasodilator, which also creates an increased calming effect. I believe it's a 15-fold increase in nitric oxide, which also amplifies this kind of calming reflex. So those are some of the ways in which it helps. There may be more, but those are the ones that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and to circle back to there's the exhale. It's the nitrous oxide with the fingers and everything. And what was the third one?
Mm-hmm. It's toning the vagus nerve.
Toning the vagus nerve, yeah. And the vagus nerve is a main part of the nervous system. Describe what the vagus nerve is.
Yeah, the vagus nerve is the largest nerve in the body. It's thicker than the spinal cord. Vagus is Latin for like wanderer. It's like the wandering nerve that wanders throughout the entire body. It's where our emotions kind of allegedly originate from the vagus nerve. And you can also buy these devices, which I've actually got one in the bedroom, this particular one attaches to your left ear and it provides electrical stimulation, which then stimulates the vagus nerve and has a similar effect. It's not very comfortable to wear, unfortunately, but it does have that effect. I prefer to just hum personally.
Yeah. And if you wake up at night, that's one where I've even found the humming has been particularly useful. Is when waking up, you get activated a little bit and trying to get back to sleep. Having that humming sound or having that humming stimulation is really calming for that moment for me, at least.
Yep.
To get back to sleep.
Yeah.
Also,
that's great.
Good. Also, surprisingly, I found that. Go ahead. Sorry, Johnny.
I was just gonna. I think there's a delay. I was just gonna add that my wife also gave me this trick of if you wake up in the middle of the night, if you're awake for more than like 10 minutes, get out of bed, do some stretching, like do some humming, and then kind of come back into bed afterwards, as opposed to just staying there and ruminating.
You want to keep that association with the bed as sleeping and comfortable rather than anxious because I can't fall asleep. Also, exactly. I found quite interestingly the managing of the techniques using with the nervous system and co-regulation are useful for my sex life. I found that those balance out things really well and help.
Yeah.
Surprising use case.
Yeah, it's huge. Sex is a good example where you have both ventral vagal and sympathetic online at the same time. There is that activation, arousal energy, but without the embodied safety and without being in your body, then it makes it very challenging. It's actually a great example. Maybe there'll be an NSM spin-off Improve Your Sex Life course.
Would imagine it might be popular. Yeah. So the next one I was going to ask you about is there's, and you're talking about the nitric oxide coming out when you put your fingers over your eyelids and then put your fingers, thumbs in your ears there to do your exhale.
Mm-hmm.
And in Stephen Kotler in that Stealing Fire, they talk about multiple different phases of trying to get into a flow state. And the first phase is really the struggle phase when you're trying to get yourself together. You know, maybe if it's an event or a program, you're trying to get to that, and you're getting all the way even laid up to it. And then if you're competing in an event, you're doing that same thing. Or if you're just trying to get ready to write, you're organizing your materials, you're pulling them all up and getting there. And then you need that release stage before being able to drop into flow. And that release stage is trying to get you to relieve some nitric oxide. And so that way you like, as you described, you are able to do a calming effect immediately, but still keeping some of the focus energies. I guess it's trying to balance yourself between that sympathetic and vagal, and not polyvagal. Which version of which one would be the sympathetic and which one?
The ventral vagal.
Ventral vagal, yes, yeah. Trying to balance it there before getting into a flow state. And so I think that technique is useful for getting into a creative flow state as well as competing in lots of different ways and using that finger technique to. Is there another way to get the nitrous oxide as well?
Possibly through extended breath holds, but I'm not certain about that. The only one that I'm sure of is the humming. Yeah. You can also blow bubbles. Blowing bubbles in water as well creates a similar kind of vibration effect.
Oh, interesting. I've seen that people who are practicing to get a tone right for singing do that blowing bubbles as a way to practice that. That's interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I mean, singing is another great example. Like, even if you don't enjoy singing for the sake of singing, it's a great thing to do. And there's some interesting studies that have shown how there's this phenomenon of heart rate variability entrainment. So when people sing together or make the same tone together, their heart rate variability will actually match each other and create like the same tone, which I find fascinating. So it's almost like another way in which we co-regulate with the people around us.
Yeah, and a lot of us who have wearables and using it track our heart rate variability, and that has some correlation with our vagus nerve and how I believe it's how healthy it is, perhaps, maybe not, but has some correlation to what because if you have a declining trend in your heart rate variability, that's a sign, hey, you need to get some more recovery, and that's how we use it in performance and recovery. But it's interesting that then would have some connection to our nervous system. Do you know much about that?
Of course. Yeah. So the HRV metric basically measures the kind of gap between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So more often than not, it's just a measure of how active is our parasympathetic system in any moment. And so the vagus nerve, if that has what's known as good tone, then it implies that we have a high capacity to drop into the parasympathetic state. So if you have a high heart rate variability, that implies that you also have good vagal tone. And you can also reverse engineer that in the sense of if you increase your vagal tone through, say, humming or a bunch of other practices, then that will likely increase your heart rate variability as well.
And that's often done through exercise, rest and recovery, just all the good nutrition, all the key basics to build a better heart rate variability.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors. I'd actually like to do an essay on this at some point, because there are so many things that influence it. But basically, getting all of the factors that improve your recovery and your capacity to recover will influence it. Everything from the way that you breathe to the food that you're eating to how well hydrated you are, the quality of your sleep, like all of it influences.
One of the exercises from the course that really stood out was the 3-2-1 technique, which I find I use a lot, which is the built when you are starting to feel overwhelmed or some type of anxiousness or any hijacking, is the 3-2-1 from my lesson from the course, is to look at three things. Look for three things with your eyes, identify them, name them, then three things you hear or two things you hear, which I love that two things you hear piece, because you hear lots more than two things. And then finally, one thing you feel, and oftentimes it's just my feet touching the ground that I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Do we lose you there, Jonny?
No, I'm still here.
Okay, good. Yeah, the video went off. Yeah. And then whatever touches your feet touches the ground. I just, that's been so powerful. I want to thank you just for that part of the thing, and I wanted to share that with the audience. But in the course, one of the techniques that we learned was the 8 practice, and it embodies a lot of what we were talking about throughout this whole thing, and it really stuck with me. And if you're game, I'd be, if you're game to guide us on one, maybe we could guide one together for our listeners to understand what the 8 practice is, and do a little bit of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm down. Let's do it.
Yeah. So how would you describe APE, and then let's try one out.
Yeah. So APE is a acronym for awareness, posture, emotion, or emotion and sensation. And the practice is basically not changing anything, but just bringing your awareness to those 3 areas and exploring and building, as you said, this sense of embodied awareness.
So how would we practice that?
Okay, so let's see. If you first just get comfy in your seat, sometimes I like to roll my shoulders back, maybe let out a sigh, let out a yawn. And then from this place, you can have your eyes open. I usually like to close down my eyes. And then just notice what the quality of your awareness is like in this moment. Are you aware of the space behind you, for example? Are you aware of your butt on the seat or your feet on the floor? Is your awareness contracted right now? Or does it feel expansive and spacious? And you don't need to change it, but just noticing what quality is there right now. And then turning your attention to your posture. Noticing your spine, how your spine is right now. If you notice any tension at any points, what angle is your pelvis? Is it tilted forward or tilted back? How does your head feel resting on your neck? And your body might start to change as you bring awareness to different points. That's fine, but just don't try and consciously change anything. And then finally, exploring any emotional qualities or sensations that are present in the body. And again, without any judgment, just witnessing, noticing what is here right now. So scanning down into your chest, noticing if there's any tension there or spaciousness. There's breath going down there, and then down into your belly, into your lower diaphragm, and breathing into that space, bringing presence and aliveness down into the belly, into the lower body. Yeah, and just tuning in and listening. It's almost like you're exploring what is the weather pattern that is present in your body right now, and just giving yourself space to listen to the feedback and the data that's coming from your body. And finally, expanding your awareness to the space above you, and space to the sides of you, space below you. You can gently open up your eyes in your own time, coming back into the space, stretching any way that feels good. And that was a brief brief 8 practice, something that you can do pretty much anywhere. You don't have to be in a seated meditation position. You can do it in the car sometimes, do it while you're waiting in line. It's really about getting curious of like, what is going on internally right now? Like what is my body telling me?
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you. What's one piece of advice you would give to someone who's just starting to explore nervous system management, and how would they approach it? What they should do? What's the first step?
Yeah. I hate giving advice because it's always going to be specific to the person. But
Yeah.
I think some broad statements that I would feel comfortable sharing would be: stay curious. Like if you can truly stay in a place of curiosity and openness, even when challenging emotions are arising, that is generally the key. Because when you're curious, you're not closed down, you're not contracted, and you're not over identified with story. Often you're just like, like that's interesting. I'm crying right now. Like I wonder what's there. The second piece I would say is embodied safety is really key, particularly for people that may have had challenging experiences in the past, traumas, things like this. And one of the best ways of building embodied safety is co-regulating with a specialist. So someone who is trained in a somatic therapeutic modality. That's a big jumble of words, but it basically means someone who's trained in either somatic experiencing or Hakomi or conscious connected breathwork, and is trauma aware, basically. That's especially for people that know they've had things in the past that haven't been fully felt. That's extremely, extremely helpful. And then finally, I'd say it really is a series of practices. And in the same way that you wouldn't expect to join a gym and then be ripped with a 6-pack next week, it's something that takes time. It takes dedicated effort. And so committing to a really good starting point, I think, is a daily practice of non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR, which I can send you a link to include in the show notes. And this is a practice which builds interoception, which is what we were just talking about through APE. It flushes out cortisol in your system. It kind of resets the dopamine pathways, and it enables us to get a little bit of that like deep rest and nourishment that is very, very often hard to get in kind of very busy, fast-paced lives. So I think that is generally speaking, most people I meet are they spend too much time in the high-tone sympathetic state, and they struggle to downshift. And so making downshifting a practice and something that you train in, and then having a good rest ethic, as Kevin Kelly says, not just a work ethic, but having a good rest ethic, is really important.
Thank you. That NSDR protocol is fantastic. And another thing that I've been regularly using, it's kind of my afternoon lunch protocol. Nice. Recharges, and I come back with extensive energy. I've been had a great night's rest, and I'm really recharged. And so it's a fantastic protocol. So definitely we'll put that in the show notes for everyone. I think that's a fantastic place to wrap up, Jonny. If someone wants to reach out to you, what do you recommend? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm fairly active on Twitter. Jonny M1LLER is the Twitter handle there. If you're curious to learn more about the nervous system course, that's nsmastery.com, and we have a cohort coming up in mid-September. And then finally, I have a podcast as well. It's called Curious Humans, and quite a few of the conversations are in this kind of genre of exploring the nervous system. So that might be a good place for people to check out as well.
Great. Thank you for being on the show, Jonny. Welcome to the newest episode of Stamina Lab, hosted by me, Glenn Lubert. If you're ready to upgrade your performance, achieve mental clarity, and improve your well-being, well, then you're in the right place. You'll hear the stories of professionals who have taken on big challenges while managing their energy and longevity through the ups and downs of pursuing their goals. Enjoy this episode, then head to the show notes to learn more so you can take the next steps to build the habits and systems you need to achieve your dreams.